in a small village nestled in the rolling hills of the countryside, in long time ago, a young boy named Leo lived with his mother in a tiny cottage. Their lives were simple, but filled with love and warmth. However, fate had other plans for Leo, and their fortunes took a dramatic turn. Leo's father had passed away, leaving behind a small inheritance that dwindled away, leaving them with barely enough to survive. And the few coins Alara had saved were nearly gone. Their old cow, Bess, a creature with a placid temperament and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of the ages, had been their faithful provider of creamy milk and a source of comfort for Leo. But now, age had caught up with Bess, and her udder was dry. "Leo, my dearest boy," Alara said one crisp morning. Her brow furrowed with worry as she stirred a meager pot of thin broth. "We've put it off as long as we can. Today, you must take Bess to the market in Oak Haven. It pains me deeply, but we desperately need the money to buy flour. Perhaps some firewood, and hopefully a few seeds for a new planting in the spring." Leo, a lad of 10, with a mop of unruly brown hair, and eyes that sparkled with curiosity. He cherished the quiet companionship of Bess, the way she would nuzzle his hand for a scratch behind her ears. He remembered the countless evenings he'd spent leaning against her warm flank in the meadow, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. Yet, he understood the stark reality of their situation. With a sigh that seemed too heavy for his young shoulders, he fetched the worn leather halter and gently led Bess out of their small yard towards the winding path that led to Oakhaven. The journey was slow and contemplative. Bess moved with a deliberate, aged gait, and Leo walked beside her, occasionally stroking her soft muzzle and whispering words of affection. As they rounded a bend in the path, where ancient oaks cast long dappled shadows, they encountered an unusual figure leaning against a moss-covered stone. It was an old man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by time and laughter, his eyes twinkling with an almost mischievous light. He wore a coat pieced together from squares of every imaginable fabric: velvet, corduroy, even what looked like shimmering fish scales, and a tall, pointed hat adorned with tiny silver bells that jingled softly in the gentle breeze. "Good day to you, young traveler," the old man said, his voice a low, melodious rumble. "And a fine, sturdy cow you have there. Where might you be headed on this fine morning?" "To the market in Oakhaven, sir," Leo replied, his voice a little hesitant. "My mother and I need to sell her." The old man stroked his long, flowing white beard, which cascaded down his chest like a snowy waterfall. "Sell her for mundane coins. Ah, but I have something far more extraordinary to offer you, young one." He reached into a voluminous pouch at his side and produced not just 5, but 7 beans. Each one was unique and captivating. One gleamed with the deep purple of an amethyst, another pulsed with the vibrant orange of a sunset over the sea. A third shone with the fresh, verdant hue of new spring leaves. The fourth sparkled with the brilliant blue of a summer sky. The fifth had intricate swirling patterns of gold within its earthy brown shells. The sixth seemed to shimmer with all the colors of the rainbow at once, and the final one had tiny, silver speckles that twinkled like distant stars. "These," the old man announced, holding them out in his gnarled hand, "are no ordinary legumes. These are magic beans. Plant them tonight, just as the moon begins to rise, and by the dawn they will have woven wonders beyond your wildest imaginings." Think of the riches, the marvels, the ease they will bring. He gave Leo a knowing wink. No more hardship for you and your dear mother. Leo was mesmerized. He had heard whispers of enchanted objects and mystical plants in the tales his grandmother used to tell. But he had never encountered anything like this. The beans seemed to hum with a faint, inner energy. He looked from the captivating beans to the gentle eyes of Bess, a moment of internal conflict flickering within him. The promise of a life free from the knowing grip of poverty was a powerful lure. With a deep breath, he made the trade, handing over Bess's halter in exchange for the 7 shimmering beans. He hurried back home, a strange mix of excitement and apprehension bubbling within him, the beans clutched tightly in his small, sweaty hand. But when Alara saw him return, empty-handed, her face already etched with worry, crumpled in dismay. "Where is Bess? What happened at the market? Did you get a fair price?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Leo, beaming with what he believed was good fortune, held out the beans. "Look, Mother, I traded her for these. They're magic beans. The kind old man said they'll bring us untold riches by morning." Alara stared at the array of colorful beans in his outstretched palm, then at her son's hopeful, innocent face. A wave of despair washed over her. "Magic beans," she repeated, her voice rising in disbelief and a touch of anger. "Leo, how could you be so gullible? We needed money for food, for warmth. Those are just beans. Fancy, perhaps, but just beans." Tears welled in her eyes, born of exhaustion and worry. In a fit of exasperation, she snatched the beans from his hand and flung them out the window, where they scattered amongst the overgrown weeds in their small garden. "Go inside, Leo," she said, her voice thick with disappointment. "There will be no supper tonight. Your foolishness has seen to that." Leo, his initial excitement crushed, felt a lump form in his throat. He trudged inside, the image of the vibrant beans arcing through the air, replaying in his mind. He went to his small bed, the gnawing emptiness in his stomach mirroring the emptiness in his heart. The next morning, Leo awoke to a peculiar stillness. Sunlight streamed through his small window, but something felt different. He sat up and glanced outside. What he saw stole his breath. Where his mother had flung the beans, a colossal stalk of incredible thickness and vibrant green leaves spiraled upwards, its summit lost in the swirling white clouds that usually drifted far overhead. It was the magic beans. In the darkness of the night, they had taken root and grown with astonishing speed and vigor. A sense of wonder mixed with a touch of trepidation filled Leo. Ignoring his empty stomach, he cautiously climbed out of his window and onto the broad, sturdy leaf of the lowest part of the stalk. It felt surprisingly resilient beneath his weight. Driven by an irresistible curiosity, he began to climb. Up and up he went, the familiar world below shrinking with every upward movement. He passed through layers of cool, damp clouds, each one momentarily obscuring his view before he emerged into the brilliant sunshine above. The air grew thinner and crisper. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the beanstalk ended in a strange and wondrous land. The sky here was a deeper shade of blue, and the clouds seemed closer, almost within reach. In the distance, perched atop a rolling green hill, stood a formidable castle, its towers piercing the sky like jagged teeth. A winding path, paved with stones that shimmered with an inner light, led towards it. Hesitantly, Leo began to walk along the path. As he drew closer to the castle, he noticed its immense size. The door was easily twice the height of their cottage. Taking a deep breath, he reached for the massive iron knocker and let it fall. The sound echoed like a distant clap of thunder. After a long moment, the door creaked open, revealing a woman of staggering proportions. Her face, though large, held a surprising gentleness, and her eyes were kind. She wore a simple but enormous gown of deep blue, and a string of what looked like polished river stones adorned her thick neck. "Well now," she said, her voice a low rumble that nonetheless held a note of warmth. "What have we here?" "A little lad all the way up in the clouds. You must be lost." "Please, kind giantess," Leo said, his voice small in comparison to hers. "My name is Leo. I've traveled far, and I'm very hungry and tired. Would you be so kind as to offer me a bit of food and shelter?" The giant's wife, whose name was Imelda, looked down at the small boy with a sympathetic gaze. "Oh, you poor dear. You've come to a dangerous place. This castle belongs to my husband Gorak. He is a giant, you see, and not a very hospitable one, especially when he smells humans. You'd best come inside quickly, and I'll see if I can find you something to eat and a safe place to hide before he returns." Leo, his heart hammered in his chest at the mention of the giant, gratefully accepted her offer and slipped inside. Imelda led him to a vast kitchen the size of their entire cottage, with a fireplace that could roast an entire ox. She quickly offered him a hunk of cheese as big as his head and a loaf of bread that could have served a dozen families. Leo ate gratefully, feeling his strength return. Just as he finished, a tremendous series of booming footsteps shook the very foundations of the castle. Thump, thump, thump. Imelda's eyes widened with alarm. "That's Gorak's. Quick, hide yourself." She bundled Leo into a large, empty copper pot near the hearth and placed the heavy lid on top, just as the kitchen door creaked open with a groan. A colossal figure filled the doorway. Gorak the giant was even larger and more fearsome than Leo could have imagined. His eyes were like fiery coals, and his booming voice echoed through the castle. "Fee! I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive, or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." Imelda quickly stepped forward. "Nonsense, my dear," she said, her voice trying to sound casual, despite the tremor in it. "You're imagining things. You've just come in from the outside. Perhaps you smell the oxen I roasted for your supper," Gorak grumbled. But the aroma of roasted meat seemed to distract him. He lumbered over to the enormous table and began to devour a whole roasted ox, tearing off chunks with his bare hands. While Gorak ate, Leo huddled silently in the copper pot, his heart pounding like a drum against his ribs. Once the giant had finished his enormous meal, he bellowed, "Bring me my golden harp." Imelda brought forth a beautiful harp crafted from polished gold, its strings shimmering with an ethereal light. Gorak placed it on a nearby table. "Play," he commanded. The harp began to play the most enchanting music Leo had ever heard, a melody so sweet and soothing that soon the giant's heavy eyelids began to droop. Before long, Gorak was snoring loudly, the sound like distant thunder rolling across the mountains. Seeing his opportunity, Leo cautiously lifted the lid of the copper pot. He peeked out and saw the golden harp resting unguarded on the table. A sudden thought sparked in his mind. If he could take the harp, perhaps it could bring joy and prosperity to his mother and him. Quietly as a mouse, Leo crept out of the pot and towards the table. He reached for the golden harp, his small fingers closing around its smooth, cool frame. But as he lifted it, the harp seemed to sense his touch. It let out a series of melodious but piercing chimes, instantly waking the giant. "Thief!" roared Gorik, his eyes snapping open, his gaze immediately falling upon the small boy clutching the golden harp. Fury contorted his massive face. He lunged towards Leo. Leo, his heart leaping into his throat, dropped the harp and scrambled towards the door. He fled through the giant's enormous kitchen, Imelda watching with a mixture of fear and pity, and threw himself onto the beanstalk, beginning a desperate slide downwards. The giant's heavy footsteps echoed behind him, shaking the very leaves of the beanstalk. Down, down, down. Leo slid, the wind whipping past his face, the giant's angry roars growing louder above him. He could feel the beanstalk swaying precariously under the giant's weight as Gorak began his clumsy descent. Finally, through the swirling leaves, Leo saw his small cottage below. He yelled, his voice thin with terror. "Bring the axe, quickly. The giant is coming down." Alara, who had been watching the impossibly tall beanstalk with a growing sense of unease, rushed out of the cottage, her hands trembling as she clutched their old, well-worn axe. As soon as Leo reached the bottom and tumbled onto the familiar grass of their garden, he cried, "Chop it down, mother, chop it down." Together, Leo and Alara began to hack at the thick, woody base of the beanstalk. The axe bit into the tough fibers, splintering the wood. They worked with frantic energy, their fear lending strength to their blows. The giant's heavy footsteps were getting closer. With a final, mighty groan, the beanstalk began to sway violently. Gorak, halfway down, roared in frustration and clung desperately to the swaying vine. But it was no use. With a deafening crack, the beanstalk snapped near the base and began to fall. The giant let out a final, terrifying bellow as he plummeted downwards, crashing to the earth with a ground-shattering thud not far from their cottage. Leo and Alara stood there, panting, their hearts still racing, watching as the enormous beanstalk lay still. They were safe. And lying beside them, where Leo had dropped it in his haste, was the magical golden harp. Alara picked it up, her fingers brushing against its shimmering strings. As she did, it began to play a soft, beautiful melody, filling the air with notes of hope and peace. With the golden harp's enchanting music bringing joy and, as they soon discovered, a steady stream of fascinated visitors who offered generous gifts in return for a song, Leo and Alara never had to worry about poverty again. Leo had learned a valuable lesson about the consequences of rash decisions, but also about the unexpected magic that could sometimes blossom from the most unlikely of beginnings.